Joining us now is Shelby Steele, esteemed author of so many phenomenal books, filmmaker, and senior fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution. He joins us now. Dr. Steele, I was just talking to Bob Woodson, who said, and I'd like your view on this, he said, he obviously doesn't think Trump is racist, but his point is that you get a lot further with people by not making the situation personally focused on someone who, for correctly or not, is a beloved leader in the city, and instead focus on what can be done to turn the city around. What are your thoughts?
Well, I always agree with Mr. Woodson. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yes, it's much better to focus on policy. On the other hand, that said, I think we're in a culture war, an extremely important one, and that the terms of that war sort of influence power itself. What Trump said about Baltimore is something that truly needed to be said. I've done worked on film this summer and been to inner city, spent a lot of time in different cities in inner city, and this is a profound problem. Just not just the shootings and so forth that go on, but the utter human despair is just remarkable. And Trump, in that sense, is, because in America we're always deferential toward blacks, toward poverty, and we in other words imprison ourselves in a kind of politeness. Trump does not do that. He is not deferential. He does not have white guilt. What he does have is very difficult truths that need to be said, need to be dealt with. And of course, on the other hand, Bob is absolutely right. It shouldn't put people off, but it does put people off, and it does give people the opportunity to dismiss what he says. On the other hand, I think one of the reasons he was elected is that he's not deferential. You can trust that he means what he says. And in this case, I think he's right. These inner cities are horrible,
disgraceful,
just horrible, and corrupt, and so forth.
And Shelby, I think that when you look at going all the way back to like Nancy Pelosi's father, I'm only mentioning him because this goes back to the 40s. Really, this leadership. He was I think the 39th mayor of Baltimore, Thomas D'Alessandro, and he was another example of failed liberal leadership. And a city that used to have 1 million people now has 600,000 people. That right. Fact in and of itself is just a stunner.
Right. I spent some time in St. Louis this summer, and St. Louis used to have close to 1 million people. It now has 235,000.
Oh, God.
3/4 of it's gone. So this is really, and again, I think in many ways it comes out of our history. America has been shamed by its history. We have to be honest about that. And that's caused it to in a sense, become redemptive and we've sort of changed our idea of what virtue is. And it has to do with being deferential toward victims of the past. And that's sort of now our cultural norm. And it's choking us to death. You can't name problems if you're going to be deferential all the time, if you're going to be apologetic, and shy about it. No, these inner cities are just blighted. They're just human suffering, generation after generation. And of course they have 3 or 4 generations to everyone else's one. And so the problem multiplies. The government supports it, feeds it. Cummings is a part of the problem. He facilitates all of this. Same in Chicago, same in Detroit, same in New Orleans, so forth. So again, until we get to a place where we're able to get past, particularly white America, let me be frank about it. White America is so terrorized of being seen as racist, they act guilty. They act guiltily even when they're not guilty. And that becomes something that blacks then sees as their power. White guilt equals black power. And people like Cummings have survived on that forever. Well, that's the problem here. That's the dynamic. Until we break that dynamic, we can't go in and talk about the problem. We can't talk about teenage pregnancy. We can't talk about the absolute disappearance of marriage and family. The horror chambers that are the public schools. We can't get to those things because it's impolite. And in this sense, I guess I have to say that Trump's impoliteness is called for.
Yeah, and I think again they get away with it, and no more so than Al Sharpton, who of course, like a bad cold, just keeps coming back. Let's listen.
Little did I know that Mr. Trump was going to, on the eve of this, attack the congressman from this city. And not only the congressman, but the people of this city, in the most bigoted and racist way. He attacks everybody. He has a particular venom for blacks and people of color. George Wallace ran in '68. George Wallace didn't do some of the things that in the campaign. Right. George Wallace was a terrible guy, stood in the door at the University of Alabama. But in the campaign, he tried to dress it up more than what we're seeing. And it's a consistent pattern and a deliberate political strategy that would make George Wallace blush what this president is doing.
And that was just part of the venom he spewed, but basically saying that the president is just trying to rile up his base and using these racial dog whistles to get people excited about voting for him. I mean, that's just, and the cable television, as I told Bob, they just eat it up year after year.
Right. Well, Sharpton is out there doing what he always does. He wants black Americans to have an identity that is grounded in their victimization. He wants black Americans to think of themselves as victims of America. That's how he gets paid off. That's how he continues to. So a moment like this, he's going to just jump on it and try to rub it in Trump's face. But it's just the same old Al. It is use of victimization as power. The tragedy there, of course, is that once you think of yourself as a victim, the same thing is true with reparations. The same thing, once you think of yourself that way, you're pretty much finished. You don't see opportunity anymore. You see the lack of it. You see a world that is unfriendly to you, and all you have left then is your meager little anger, and that's where Sharpton is at this point. Everything that came out of the '60s in terms of dealing with inner city poverty, everything failed. Not some of it, everything failed. Well, that really points to this underlying symbiotic relationship in America between blacks and whites that's gone on since before the Mayflower. Where each race constantly looks for leverage with the other race. Well, Sharpton is happy when he hears the president say that because it gives him leverage. He can say, see, even the president of the United States is racist. That's why you should give me things. Pay my taxes, for example. But it's a hustle that comes out of this underlying relationship, and until we really address that, until whites, for example, become confident enough in their own lack of racism that they stand up once again and reject this idea that we have to just defer. We basically have an affirmative action culture where we defer, we offer deference to former victims as a way, I guess, of making ourselves legitimate. Well, it's a dead end street, but boy, we keep clinging to it and playing it out in little incidents like this.
We're talking to Shelby Steele here on the Laura Ingraham podcast. The 2020 Democrats are kind of repeating a lot of these same talking points on race.
I think that what Donald Trump has done over the past couple of days is despicable. And the reason he has done this is that Trump is trying to distract from the fact that his is a failed presidency. And Donald Trump hopes that if he can just throw some racism, really ugly stuff, that everyone will pay attention to that instead of paying attention to what a failure he is.
She's a lot of people saying she could overtake Biden and Kamala Harris and become the Democrat nominee, meaning would get the same thing we got under Obama, which is no progress on race relations. It actually got worse under Obama.
That's absolutely right. It would be just the same old symbiotic relationship where she's now stealing the thunder of black suffering. She's saying, I'm going to redeem us from that, and that's why you should vote for me, and that's why you should give me power, and so forth. So everybody exploits poor blacks. They're like just a deep well of power, and it certainly worked for Obama. He did get elected. Maybe it'll help her as well. I hope not, but because my sense is that America is beginning to move beyond this. People see that this is a corruption, that there isn't really very much victimization out here anymore. They kind of long for it. And reparation, it seems to me, is just one of the ways that they try to keep the issue alive and use it as leverage against whites, and in order to be elected and find and build power for themselves.
Bob pointed out that in Florida, Trump, only won by a razor-thin margin of overall votes, and that 100,000 of Trump's votes came from single black women living in pretty poor conditions. That's pretty interesting. I mean, it seems like a small number overall, but that made a difference for Trump. I mean, should be a lot more, but I think he wants to give people a lifeline out of this and extend the what do you have to lose? Let's try new solutions. But I think he's got to start talking about the solutions now.
I would agree with you there. He really does. Maybe he will. I don't know. But I like the fact in the sense that there's a paradigm here. It's terrible. It's corrupt. He's jarring that paradigm. He's saying it's inauthentic. It's not really. It's not producing anything. It is a new form of oppression. Blacks now suffer from liberalism as their great oppressor, where racism once was. Now it is literally liberalism that dehumanizes them, that keeps them locked in patterns of self-defeat and so forth. Well, he's jarring that. He's shaking it up. That's of value. Now you're absolutely right. He has to come up with with a more comprehensive statement that might move the whole culture in a new direction where race is concerned. And he hasn't done that yet.
It really is interesting and depressing. I was depressed yesterday, Shelby, because it seemed like I was back where I was at Dartmouth all those years ago, where it was the same dynamic. Like if you criticized affirmative action, you were racist. If you criticized African American studies and all the studies, which we thought were, Dinesh and I were doing all these articles on how the studies were, and I think Dinesh wrote, were ghettoizing various groups of who deserve better, groups of Americans. And he's an immigrant. He's an immigrant, very dark-skinned Indian who came here with nothing in high school and then ended up becoming a huge success. But he back then he couldn't understand it because he's like, I come from India and that's where real discrimination takes place. And he was absolutely stunned at how white people were so cowed by all these bogus charges of racism. I mean, not that there's not racism, there is racism, but it was used as a weapon all those years ago in the 1980s at Dartmouth.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because my sense is I agree with Dinesh. My sense is that the problem today is in white America. If white America has been acculturated over the last 60 years to accommodate, to be deferential, to say, okay, I don't really agree with affirmative action, but let's go along with it. It's kept going, deferring, going along with that to the point where we've now wiped out our education system in America, all the way through the college level at this point. Through deference, constantly deferring, constantly giving into this terror of being seen as racist. And until whites stand up and begin to acknowledge that the terror they feel, and say, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of feeling it. I'm not racist. Call me that all you want. The moment that begins to happen, the world will change. Blacks will, many blacks will be happy to see that kind of thing because it treats them as human beings rather than as victims. But we haven't. Trump is on the side of the good in that sense. He's far from perfect, but he's on the side of the good in that sense. He's shaking up that paradigm.
I agree. I think as much as people, don't like his style, I can say this from all the time I've spent with him over the last 20 years, and I've known him for a long time. He's truly just absolutely flummoxed that we're still in this same feedback loop on the inner city. And the same solutions are being tried. They didn't work the first 20 times you did them, so they're probably not going to work now. And for the life of him, he's like, why are we still doing the same stuff? It doesn't work. Let's do something else. And that's kind of a simple way of looking at it, but he's truly outraged by that, and he's very frustrated. Very frustrated. And he wants there to be real positive change. He really, truly does.
I bet he does. I mean, I think I'm happy to hear that. That frustration is where maybe change will come. If he validates it as the President of the United States and says, you can believe in America without being a racist, that's a message that blacks want to hear, that everybody wants to hear. That's great leadership. And I think Trump has that. He has this sort of atavistic vision of America as a great nation. And racial reform ought to be done in the context of that greatness. Mm-hmm. Where we don't just say, oh, change your habits and do this. You say to Americans, listen, we have moved beyond racism. We must discipline ourselves to never allow it to recur again. And we must, therefore, ask of minorities that they move themselves forward, as all Americans do. And that we give nothing to minorities that we don't give to anyone else, that we just break that distinction down. Well, that's I'm glad to hear that, because I wondered if he had a sort of personal
Oh, he's so enraged. Oh yeah, no, he sits there and he's like, how is this still happening? And he's really impatient. Like, he's impatient for change. Obama was a very powerful orator in his own way, and he could give a great speech, and he had a lot of friends in a lot of, high places in the entertainment industry, and they empathized, and not a darn thing was done. Not a darn thing was done. No change. At least Ben Carson's out there trying to open up these very few public housing slots that do exist to deserving American citizens instead of giving them to illegal immigrants, which is what we've been doing for a long time. So I think that there's all sorts of ways that Trump can appeal to a diverse group of low-income Americans by saying, look, the other people want to use kids as political talking points at the border. I think your kids deserve better right here at home. And I think he should keep saying that. And I'll let you close it out.
Well, I agree with that. I agree with that entirely. I'm glad to hear that he has that kind of a passion. That I think will make his presidency great. This sounds really extravagant, and people may chuckle, but there is something that's Churchillian about Donald Trump, in that he has a vision of America that is beyond just reason. That has to do with the heart, with passion, and that's very attractive. We've never sort of relied on that kind of thing to overcome domestic problems, race, and so forth. I think that's the way to go, and that Trump has sort of inadvertently maybe pointed that out.
Interesting
that we're great enough to deal with this problem.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to keep deferring to it and coming up with artificial solutions and so forth. We can go into the inner city and say, you people be great Americans.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal. The American dream is yours. Everything ought to be focused on that.
Yeah, and I think that what, again, is fascinating is how they are trying to keep him out of going into the inner city, as they did in 2016 with the riots in San Jose and Oakland. And then in Chicago, remember, he was going there, and they basically threatened violence, and the campaign canceled the event. They want to keep him out of the inner city because I think they know there are a lot of people who maybe they know him from pop culture, and they see him as president, and they think it's kind of unique, and he's kind of bold and brash, and that's attractive to a lot of people. So I think they want to cordon him off from that inner city, Shelby.
Yeah. I don't blame him, because he has charisma.
Mm-hmm.
He's the things that worry other people don't worry Black, the impoliteness that he shows. People forgive that if with the leader they feel really sees them as they are, as as human beings, and I think Trump does.
Mm-hmm. Shelby Steele, it's always great to talk to you here on the Laura Ingraham podcast. We got to get you on TV. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Such an important conversation we're having, and Trump ignited it. Whatever you think of that original tweets over the weekend, he ignited it. Frank in Maryland. Frank, welcome.
Hey, hi, how are you, Laura? I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
Laura, I just want to stop the racist talk. I mean, you can't have a conversation with anybody if all they're doing is saying, oh, you're a racist because I disagree with you. Can we have a clear conversation about what's happening in this country?
I agree. I think it's used as a way to stop debate. It's used as a way to shut debate down and shield people from accountability. So you don't have to be accountable if you're protected by false charges of racism against you. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham podcast. I want to thank all of our sponsors: Genucel, Pluto TV, ADT Home Security, all fabulous. Let's go to Dan in Maryland. Dan, welcome.
Hi, Laura. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you.
I'm so glad the president brought this up. I'm a lifelong resident of the Baltimore area, and Baltimore is a disaster. I don't think there's anything racist in any way, shape, or form what the president said. I was on Twitter this weekend, and Baltimore was all the rage on Twitter. Thank goodness, finally. Our cities have been run by Democrats forever. The last Republican elected to Baltimore City Council was 1947. Baltimore had a higher income than the national average in the 1950s, and now it's below average. The city schools are a disaster. The last mayor was resigned amid a scandal. The mayor before that said during the Freddie Gray riots, "Okay, let them riot."
Yeah, we talked about
and
that.
The mayor before that resigned because she was stealing gift cards meant for the poor.
No, deep corruption. It's the corruption runs deep, and it hurts the kids. I mean, they care about the kids. They saw the kids at the border, kids in cages, kids separated. There are a lot of kids separated from their families because the families are gone, dead. Fathers, brothers in Baltimore. You don't have to go to the border to see the ultimate in family separation. So we got a lot of big problems right here at home. We've been talking about